The rain did not fall in Seattle. It hammered. It was a relentless, rhythmic assault against the glass walls of the Meridian General Hospital's emergency department, turning the city lights into smeared, impressionistic blurs of neon and gray. Inside, the air was thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the low, electric hum of anxiety that only a Level 1 trauma center could generate. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, their shoes squeaking softly on the polished linoleum while doctors barked orders in clipped, urgent tones. In the center of this controlled chaos stood Alara Vance. She was 32 years old, wearing scrubs that had seen better days, her hair pulled back into a severe bun that emphasized the sharp, angular lines of her face. To the casual observer, she was invisible, a junior triage nurse, a cog in the machine. Someone who fetched supplies, updated charts, and held the hands of the frightened while the real work happened elsewhere. But Alara's eyes were not looking at the charts. They were scanning the room, tracking the subtle shifts in posture, the slight pallor of skin, the micro-tremors in a patient's hand. She saw what others missed because she had spent the last decade learning to see the world not as it appeared, but as it functioned. And right now, her instincts were screaming. The automatic doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss, admitting a gust of wet wind and a stretcher team rushing a middle-aged man toward Bay 4. He was clutching his chest, his face ashen, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. The attending physician, Dr. Marcus Thorne, stepped forward immediately. Thorne was a man who wore his authority like a tailored suit, impeccable, expensive, and suffocating. He was the head of emergency medicine, a position he held not just through competence, but through a ruthless ability to navigate hospital politics and crush dissent. He looked at the patient, then at the monitor, and sighed, a sound of profound irritation rather than concern. "Another panic attack," Thorne muttered, loud enough for the nearby staff to hear. "Get him an EKG, rule out the obvious, and get him out of my bay. We have real patients waiting." Alara stepped forward, her voice quiet but steady. "Dr. Thorne, his diaphoresis is disproportionate to the reported anxiety, and look at his left arm, there's slight cyanosis in the fingertips." Thorne turned to her, his eyes narrowing. The room seemed to shrink, the ambient noise fading into a dull roar as all attention shifted to the confrontation. "Nurse Vance," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I did not ask for your diagnosis. I asked for an EKG. Do your job, or I will find someone who can." Alara hesitated. She knew the protocols. She knew the hierarchy. But she also knew the signs of a rare vascular anomaly that mimicked panic attacks but led to rapid systemic collapse if untreated. It was a condition she had studied extensively during her years abroad, a condition that didn't appear in standard American medical textbooks. "Sir, if we wait for the EKG, we might lose the window for intervention. His pulse is thready. Please just let me check his capillary refill and—" "Enough," Thorne snapped. He waved a hand dismissively, turning his back on her. "Security, keep an eye on this one. She's becoming a liability." The humiliation was public, sharp, and precise. Alara felt the eyes of her colleagues on her, some sympathetic, most indifferent. She lowered her gaze, swallowing the bitter taste of injustice, and stepped back into the shadows. But she did not stop watching. She never stopped watching. If you are enjoying this story of hidden strength and institutional blindness, please take a moment to like this video. Your support helps us bring these narratives to life and ensures we can continue exploring themes of justice and resilience. Subscribe to the Code Whisperers for more stories where the underdog rises above the odds. To understand the weight of that moment, one must understand the ecosystem of Meridian General. It was a fortress of modern medicine, a gleaming tower of steel and glass that dominated the Seattle skyline. It was a place where reputation was currency, and Dr. Marcus Thorne was the banker. He had built his career on speed, efficiency, and a disdain for anything that slowed down the assembly line of patient care. To Thorne, medicine was a transaction. Input symptoms, output diagnosis, discharge. Nuance was inefficiency. Empathy was a bottleneck. Alara Vance, on the other hand, was an anomaly in his system. She had arrived 2 years ago, hired during a staffing crisis, with a resume that was oddly sparse. No prestigious fellowships, no publications in major journals, no recommendations from renowned institutions. Just a series of short-term contracts in remote clinics and humanitarian zones. When asked about her past, Alara was vague. "I worked in difficult environments," she would say. "I learned T." "Oh, adapt." Thorne had scoffed at her hiring, viewing her as a temporary fix, a warm body to fill a shift. He had assigned her to triage, the lowest rung of the clinical ladder where she could do the least amount of damage. But Alara didn't mind the low status. In fact, she preferred it. Triage gave her a vantage point. It allowed her to observe the flow of the department, to see the patterns of error, the moments where protocol failed human beings. She kept to herself, arriving early, leaving late, spending her breaks reading old medical journals in the library. She was a ghost in the machine, unnoticed and underestimated. But there were breadcrumbs, small clues that hinted at a depth far beyond her current role. Once, when a pediatric code blue was called, Alara had instinctively moved to the crash cart, her hands hovering over the defibrillator pads with a familiarity that startled the senior residents. Another time, she had corrected a dosage calculation for a complex antibiotic regimen, citing a pharmacokinetic interaction that the pharmacy software had missed. Each time, Thorne had dismissed it as luck or rote memorization, reinforcing his narrative that she was unskilled, merely adequate. He didn't know that Alara had once been a lead field medic for an international disaster response team, operating in war zones where resources were scarce and mistakes were fatal. He didn't know that she had walked away from that life after a mission went wrong, a mission where her warnings had been ignored, resulting in a tragedy that still haunted her dreams. She had come to Meridian not to climb the ladder, but to hide, to heal, to prove to herself that she could still save lives without the weight of command. But the past has a way of catching up, especially in a place where arrogance blinds people to the truth. The shift continued, the hours bleeding into one another. The rain outside intensified, lashing against the windows like a warning. Alara moved through her duties with mechanical precision, checking vitals, updating records, offering comfort. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying the interaction with Thorne. She knew she was right. She knew the patient in Bay 4 was deteriorating. She could feel it in the air, a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure of the department. Then the call came. Code Blue, Bay 4. The intercom crackled, the voice calm but urgent. Code Blue, Bay 4, Code Blue, Bay 4. Alara's heart skipped a beat. She didn't run. Running caused panic. She moved with purpose, her long strides eating up the distance. When she arrived, the scene was chaotic. The patient was on the floor, surrounded by a team of residents and nurses. Thorne was standing over him, shouting orders. Charge clear! The defibrillator paddles slammed onto the patient's chest. The body jerked. Nothing. Again. Charge to 200. Alara pushed through the crowd, her eyes locking onto the monitor. The rhythm was erratic, chaotic, ventricular fibrillation, but something was wrong. The waveform was unusual, jagged in a way that suggested not just cardiac failure, but a systemic toxicological event. Dr. Thorne, Alara said, her voice cutting through the noise. It's not just cardiac, look at the pupils, pinpoint, and the smell, bitter almonds. Thorne ignored her, focusing on the ACLS protocol. Epinephrine 1 milligram, push it. Alara grabbed his arm. It was a breach of protocol, a physical violation of the hierarchy that sent shockwaves through the room. Stop, she said, her voice low but commanding. If you give him epinephrine, you'll kill him. It's cyanide poisoning, likely from industrial exposure. He needs hydroxycobalamin, not epinephrine. The room fell silent. The residents froze. Thorne stared at her, his face purple with rage. You are obstructing a code, he hissed. Get out now. Alara didn't move. She looked at the patient, then at the monitor. He's working in the textile district. The factory next to his office had a chemical leak reported an hour ago. I saw the news alert. This isn't a heart attack, it's poisoning. Thorne shoved her back. Security, remove her. 2 orderlies grabbed Alara's arms, dragging her away from the bay. She struggled not for herself, but for the patient. Please, listen to me. Check his oxygen saturation. It's falsely high because of the cyanide binding. You're treating the wrong thing. Her voice echoed down the hallway as she was hauled out, the doors swinging shut behind her, sealing the patient inside with a doctor who was confident, competent, and completely wrong. Alara stood in the hallway, her chest heaving, her hands trembling, not from fear but from frustration. She watched through the glass window of Bay 4 as the team continued their efforts. They administered the epinephrine. They shocked him again. And again. Each shock was a hammer blow to a body that was already breaking down from within. Alara closed her eyes, remembering the training. He cold, hard logic of field medicine. Cyanide blocks cellular respiration. The cells starve for oxygen even though the blood is full of it. Epinephrine increases the heart's demand for oxygen, accelerating the death spiral. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew the patient had minutes, maybe seconds, and she was powerless to stop it. The injustice of it burned in her throat, acidic and hot. She had the knowledge, she had the solution, but she lacked the authority. In this temple of modern medicine, truth was subordinate to rank. She slumped against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, her head in her hands. She could hear the flatline tone beginning to wail from inside the bay, a long, monotonous sound that signaled the end. The door opened and Thorne emerged. He looked exhausted, frustrated, but untouched by doubt. He adjusted his stethoscope, straightening his lab coat. He looked down at Alara, his expression one of cold triumph. "He's gone," Thorne said. "Time of death 2:14 a.m., cause massive myocardial infarction complicated by resistant arrhythmia." Alara looked up, her eyes dry and hard. "It was cyanide," she whispered. "And you killed him." Thorne's face hardened. "You are finished here, Vance. Pack your things. You're suspended pending an investigation into insubordination and interference with medical care. Get out of my hospital." He turned and walked away, leaving Alara alone in the hallway, the sound of the flatline still echoing in her ears. She had tried to save a life, and for her trouble she had lost her job. The rain continued to fall outside, washing the city clean, but inside the stain of injustice remained. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt unheard despite knowing the truth, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences help build a community of support and understanding. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on the next chapter of Alara's journey. The next 48 hours were a blur of bureaucratic cruelty. Alara was escorted out of the building by security, her badge confiscated, her locker cleared out by a silent, efficient HR representative. She was given a box containing her personal items, a photo of her sister, a worn copy of Gray's Anatomy Asterisk, and a small, smooth stone she had picked up on a beach in Greece. She walked out into the rain, the box clutched to her chest, feeling the weight of her failure. She had come to Seattle to escape the ghosts of her past, to find a quiet life where she could heal. Instead, she had been thrown back into the fire. She rented a small apartment in Capitol Hill, far from the hospital, and spent the days in a fog of depression and anger. She checked the news, hoping for a correction, a retraction, anything that would acknowledge the truth. But there was nothing. The local news reported the death as a tragic heart attack, praising Dr. Thorne and his team for their heroic efforts. The hospital issued a statement commending their staff for their dedication. Alara was erased. Her warning was ignored, her competence dismissed, her integrity questioned. She considered leaving Seattle entirely. She had the skills to work anywhere, to disappear into another anonymous role, but something kept her there, a stubbornness, a refusal to let the lie stand. She began to dig. She accessed public records, looking for any mention of the chemical leak at the textile factory. She found it a minor report in a local industry blog, buried under ads for real estate. The factory had indeed had a containment breach. A small amount of cyanide-based solvent had leaked. It had been cleaned up quickly, deemed non-hazardous to the general public. But for someone working in the adjacent building with poor ventilation, it was enough. Alara printed the article. She gathered her notes. She knew she couldn't go back to Meridian. Thorne had too much power. But she also knew that the truth had a way of surfacing if you gave it enough light. She started writing, not a complaint but a case study, a detailed clinical analysis of the patient's presentation, the missed signs, and the correct treatment protocol. She anonymized the patient, but she kept the facts stark and undeniable. She sent it to every medical journal she could think of. She sent it to the state medical board. She sent it to the hospital's board of directors. And then she waited. The silence was deafening. Days turned into weeks. Alara took a job at a small urgent care clinic in Tacoma, treating sprained ankles and flu cases. It was humble work, far beneath her capabilities, but it kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. She tried to forget Meridian. She tried to forget Thorne, but the memory of the flatline tone haunted her nights. She wondered if she had done enough, if she had fought hard enough. Or if she had simply been too quiet, too compliant, too willing to accept the hierarchy. The doubt gnawed at her, a slow-acting poison F its own. Meanwhile, at Meridian General, business continued as usual. Dr. Thorne was hailed as a hero. He gave interviews, speaking about the pressures of emergency medicine, the difficulty of making split-second decisions. He never mentioned Alara. To him, she was a footnote, a disgruntled employee who had cracked under pressure. He had already replaced her with a new hire, a young nurse who nodded at everything he said and never questioned his authority. The department ran smoothly, efficiently, and coldly, but there were cracks in the facade. The patient's family had hired a lawyer. They were asking questions. Why had the toxicology screen not been run immediately? Why had the epinephrine been administered despite the unusual symptoms? The hospital's legal team was nervous. They advised Thorne to stick to the official narrative. Unexpected cardiac event, standard protocol followed. But the lawyer was persistent. He requested the full medical records, including the nursing notes. And that was when he found Alara's entry, timestamped 2 minutes before the code. Patient exhibits signs of cyanide toxicity, bitter almond odor, pinpoint pupils, false high O2 sat, recommended hydroxycobalamin. Dr. Thorne refused. The lawyer smiled. He had his smoking gun. He didn't release it to the press, not yet. He wanted to see how the hospital would react when confronted with undeniable evidence of negligence. He scheduled a meeting with the hospital administrator, Dr. Aris Thorne's older brother, Julian Thorne. Julian was the chief of staff, a man who cared more about the hospital's reputation than the truth. He read the note with growing dismay. He called Marcus into his office. "Did you ignore a nurse's assessment?" Julian asked, his voice tight. Marcus shrugged. She was hysterical, unqualified. She was trying to play doctor. "She was right, Marcus," Julian said, sliding the toxicology report across the desk. It had been run post-mortem at the lawyer's insistence. The results were clear, lethal levels of cyanide in the blood. "You killed him because you wouldn't listen to a nurse." Marcus's face went pale. "It was a fluke. She got lucky." "Luck doesn't show up in toxicology reports," Julian said. "We have a problem, a big one. If this goes public, it won't just be you. It will be the hospital. It will be me." Marcus slammed his hand on the desk. "So what? We bury it. We discredit her, say she fabricated the notes, say she was unstable." Julian looked at his brother with disgust. "You don't understand. This isn't about you anymore. It's about the institution, and I have a plan, but you need to stay out of sight. Let me handle it." Marcus nodded, relieved but uneasy. He trusted his brother, but he also feared him. Julian Thorne was a politician in a doctor's coat. He knew how to spin a story, how to manipulate the media, how to protect the brand. But he didn't know about Alara. He didn't know that she was not just a nurse. He didn't know that she was waiting. Please consider subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. We release new stories every week that explore the complexities of human nature and the triumph of integrity. Your subscription ensures you never miss a moment of these powerful narratives. Alara was working at the urgent care clinic when the phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Ms. Vance," the voice was female, professional, crisp. "This is Sarah Jenkins from the State Medical Board. We've received a formal complaint regarding an incident at Meridian General Hospital. We'd like to speak with you, off the record for now." Alara's heart pounded. "I'm listening." "We've reviewed the case of John Doe, the patient who died in your ER. We've seen your notes. We've seen the toxicology report. We believe there may have been a gross deviation from the standard of care. But we need your testimony. We need to know who you are, Ms. Vance. Your resume is unusual. Where did you learn to diagnose cyanide poisoning in a triage setting?" Alara hesitated. This was the moment. The moment she had to decide whether to remain in the shadows or step into the light. She thought of the patient. She thought of Thorne's sneer. She thought of the years she had spent hiding her past, afraid of being judged, afraid of failing again. But she realized that hiding had not saved anyone. It had only allowed the injustice to fester. "I learned it in Aleppo," Alara said quietly, "and in Gaza and in South Sudan. I was a field medic for Doctors Without Borders for 8 years. I specialized in chemical warfare incidents and mass casualty triage." There was a silence on the other end of the line. "I see," Sarah said, her voice softer now. "That changes things, Ms. Vance, significantly. Can you come to our office tomorrow? We have some people who would very much like to meet you." Alara agreed. She hung up the phone and looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the sea. Clouds casting long, golden shadows across the parking lot. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of clarity. The game was changing. The players were shifting, and she was no longer just a spectator. She was a participant, and she was ready. The next day, Alara walked into the State Medical Board offices in downtown Seattle. The building was old, dignified, with high ceilings and marble floors. It smelled of polish and paper. She was led to a conference room where 3 people were waiting. Sarah Jenkins, the investigator, a stern-looking man in a suit identified as legal counsel, and a woman in a military-style uniform, though without insignia. The woman stood as Alara entered. "Ms. Vance," she said, "I am Colonel Elena Rostova, formerly of the U.S. Army Medical Corps, currently serving as a special consultant for the Department of Health on Crisis Management and Personnel Verification." Alara froze. She recognized the name. Rostova was a legend in military medicine, known for her work in establishing field hospitals in conflict zones. She was also known for her uncompromising standards. "Colonel," Alara said, nodding respectfully, "I served under General Holloway in the 2018 Sudan mission." Rostova's eyes widened slightly. Holloway spoke highly of his lead medic, said she was the best he'd ever seen, said she could diagnose a plague by the smell of the air. Alara smiled faintly. "He exaggerated, but he was a good commander." Rostova gestured for Alara to sit. "We are not just investigating a medical error, Ms. Vance. We are investigating a culture of negligence, and we believe you are the key to exposing it. But we need to know why you didn't reveal your credentials when you were hired. Why did you hide?" Alara looked at the table, her hands clasped tightly. "Because I was tired," she said. Tired of the violence, tired of the politics. I wanted to just be a nurse. I wanted to help people without the burden of command. I thought if I kept my head down, I could find peace. And instead, you found Marcus Thorne, Rostova said dryly. Alara nodded. Yes, Rostova leaned forward. Well, Ms. Vance, peace is a luxury we cannot afford right now. Justice is required, and you are going to help us deliver it, but be warned. Thorne will fight back. He has friends in high places. He will try to discredit you, to paint you as a liar, a fraud. Are you prepared for that? Alara looked up, her eyes steady. I have faced warlords and dictators, Colonel. I think I can handle an arrogant doctor. Rostova smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Good, because we are going to war. And you are leading the charge. If you are captivated by Alara's transformation from invisible nurse to pivotal witness, please hit the like button. It helps us gauge which stories resonate most with our audience. And don't forget to comment below with your predictions for what happens next. The strategy was simple but risky. The medical board would not act alone. They needed leverage. They needed public pressure. Rostova proposed a sting operation. They would schedule a mock disaster drill at Meridian General, a mandatory exercise for all senior staff. The scenario, a multi-casualty incident involving chemical exposure. It was a scenario that mirrored the death of John Doe. Alara would be present not as a nurse but as an external evaluator invited by the board to observe the hospital's readiness. Thorne would not know her role. He would not know that his responses were being recorded, analyzed, and judged. He would be forced to perform in front of his peers, his superiors, and the very person he had dismissed. It was a trap, elegant and cruel. Alara agreed. She spent the next week preparing. She reviewed the hospital's emergency protocols. She studied Thorne's past performance reviews. She identified his weaknesses, his impatience, his disregard for nursing input, his reliance on technology over clinical intuition. She knew exactly how he would react, and she was ready to exploit it. The day of the drill arrived. The sky was clear, the air crisp. Alara arrived at Meridian General early, wearing a suit instead of scrubs. She looked different, confident, authoritative. She carried a tablet and a clipboard. She was no longer the invisible nurse. She was the auditor. She walked through the doors, and for the first time, the security guard stopped her. Can I help you, ma'am? He asked. Alara showed her badge. Alara Vance, State Medical Board, I'm here for the drill. The guard's eyes widened. He checked his list, nodded, and stepped aside. Right this way, Ms. Vance. Alara walked into the hospital, her heels clicking on the floor. The sound was sharp, decisive. She was back. And this time, she was not here to serve. She was here to judge. The emergency department was buzzing with activity. The drill had been announced, but the specifics were unknown. Staff were milling about, checking equipment, reviewing charts. Thorne was in the center of it. All barking orders, organizing teams. He looked stressed but in control. He saw Alara enter and frowned. He marched over to her, his face red. What are you doing here? He demanded. You're banned from this facility. Alara didn't flinch. She held up her badge. I'm here as an official evaluator for the State Medical Board, Dr. Thorne. Please refer to the memo sent to your administration this morning. Thorne snatched the memo from her hand, scanning it quickly. His face went pale. This is a joke, he muttered. They sent you. They sent me, Alara said calmly, and I will be evaluating your performance during the drill. I suggest you focus on your duties, Doctor. The clock is ticking. Thorne stared at her, hatred radiating from his eyes, but he couldn't argue. He couldn't fire her. He was trapped. He turned and walked away, muttering curses under his breath. Alara watched him go, a small sense of satisfaction warming her chest. The game was on. The drill began 10 minutes later. The simulation team introduced the first wave of patients, actors with makeup and moulage simulating burns and respiratory distress. The scenario, a tanker truck accident involving hazardous materials. The ED went into lockdown. Triage began. Alara stood in the corner observing, taking notes. She watched Thorne. He was efficient, yes, but he was also reckless. He bypassed triage protocols, sending patients directly to treatment bays without proper decontamination checks. He ignored the nurses' suggestions for isolation procedures. He was repeating the same mistakes. He was prioritizing speed over safety, and Alara was documenting every single one. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Code Whisperers. We are dedicated to bringing you high-quality, emotionally resonant stories that highlight the power of competence and integrity. Your support means the world to us. As the drill progressed, the complexity increased. The simulation controllers introduced a complication. One of the patients began to seize. It was a test of the team's ability to handle neurological emergencies in a contaminated environment. Thorne rushed to the patient, shouting for restraints. Alara stepped forward. Dr. Thorne, she said, her voice carrying over the noise. Check the patient's mouth, look for frothing, check the pupils. Thorne ignored her. Hold him down, administer midazolam. Alara shook her head. It's organophosphate poisoning, not a seizure. If you give him midazolam, you'll suppress his respiratory drive. He needs atropine. Thorne spun around, his face contorted with rage. You are not part of this team. Stay out of my way. But this time, the other doctors hesitated. They had heard Alara's credentials. They had seen the memo. They looked at Thorne, then at Alara. One of the residents, a young woman named Dr. Lee, stepped forward. Dr. Thorne, maybe we should check. The moolage includes frothing. Thorne slapped the chart out of her hand. I am the attending. Do as I say. The room fell silent. The tension was palpable. Alara looked at the simulation controller, who was watching from the observation deck. She gave a slight nod. The controller pressed a button. The patient flatlined. The drill was paused. The voice of the simulation director boomed over the intercom. Pause. Patient deceased. Cause of death, respiratory failure due to incorrect medication administration. Debrief in 5 minutes. Thorne stood frozen, his chest heaving. He looked at Alara, his eyes wide with shock and fear. He had failed, publicly, undeniably, and Alara had been right, again. The vindication was sweet, but it was only the beginning. The real confrontation was yet to come. The silence in the emergency department was heavier than the rain that had battered the city days before. It was a suffocating, judgmental silence, broken only by the hum of the ventilation systems and the distant, rhythmic beep of monitors in the adjacent wings. Dr. Marcus Thorne stood in the center of the bay, his hands hanging limp at his sides, his chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid bursts. He looked less like a chief of medicine and more like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him had turned to quicksand. Around him, the staff, nurses, residents, technicians, avoided his gaze, their faces masks of uncomfortable empathy and suppressed relief. For years, they had endured his tyranny, his dismissal of their expertise, his volatile temper. Now they watched as the armor cracked. Alara Vance stood a few feet away, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. She did not gloat. She did not smile, she simply waited. She knew that the simulation was merely a rehearsal. The real performance was about to begin. The double doors at the end of the corridor swung open, and a group of individuals entered with the synchronized precision of a military unit. Leading them was Colonel Elena Rostova, her presence commanding immediate attention. Beside her walked Julie. And Thorne, the chief of staff, whose face was a pale shade of gray, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle feathered in his cheek. Behind them trailed 2 members of the state medical board and a legal representative from the hospital's insurance carrier. The air in the room shifted instantly. The informal hierarchy of the ER dissolved, replaced by the rigid structure of institutional authority. Marcus Thorne straightened his spine, attempting to reclaim his dignity, but the effort was futile. He looked small. Fragile Julian approached his brother, stopping just short of touching him. Marcus, Julian said, his voice low and dangerous. My office, now. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, to explain, to blame the simulation, the actors, the unfairness of it all, but Julian cut him off with a sharp glance. Not here, not now. He turned to the room. Everyone return to your duties. The drill is concluded. Debriefing schedules will be posted. The staff dispersed quickly, eager to escape the tension. Only Alara remained, standing beside Colonel Rostova. Julian looked at her, his eyes assessing. Ms. Vance, he said, his tone carefully neutral. A word, please. Alara nodded and followed them toward the administrative wing, leaving the scene of her vindication behind. But she knew the battle was not over. It had merely moved to a different arena. The conference room on the top floor of Meridian General offered a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline, but none of the occupants were looking out. The atmosphere was icy. Julian Thorne sat at the head of the table, flanked by the legal counsel and the medical board investigators. Marcus sat to his right, sweating profusely, his tie loosened. Alara sat opposite them, with Colonel Rostova at her side. The silence stretched for a long minute, broken only by the scratching of a pen as the legal counsel took notes. Finally, Julian spoke. The simulation results are concerning, he began, choosing his words with the care of a diplomat navigating a minefield. Dr. Thorne's decision-making process appears to have deviated significantly from established protocols, specifically the failure to recognize organophosphate poisoning and the subsequent administration of contraindicated medication. He paused, looking at Marcus. Marcus, do you have an explanation? Marcus cleared his throat. It was a high-stress environment. The actors were unrealistic. The scenario was flawed. The scenario was designed by the state medical board, Rostova interrupted, her voice like steel. And the actors were certified paramedics. Your failure was not due to stress, Dr. Thorne. It was due to arrogance. You ignored the input of a qualified evaluator because you believed you knew better. just as you ignored Nurse Vance in the case of John Doe. Marcus flinched at the name. That was different. She was insubordinate. She was correct, Julian said sharply. And you were negligent. The toxicology report confirms cyanide poisoning. Your administration of epinephrine accelerated his death. We are facing a wrongful death lawsuit, Marcus. A multi-million-dollar lawsuit, and the press is already sniffing around. Marcus looked at his brother, desperation in his eyes. You have to protect me, Julian. I'm your brother. I'm the head of this department. Julian looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. I am protecting the hospital, Marcus, and right now you are the greatest threat to its survival. He turned to Alara. Ms. Vance, the board has reviewed your credentials. Your service record is exemplary. Your assessment of the John Doe case is accurate. We are prepared to offer you a settlement for wrongful termination and emotional distress. In exchange, we ask that you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the internal disciplinary actions we will take against Dr. Thorne. If you are invested in seeing justice served, please take a moment to like this video. Your engagement helps us continue to produce content that champions accountability and truth. Subscribe to join our community of storytellers and truth seekers. Alara looked at the contract slid across the table. It was a generous offer, enough money to pay off her student loans to buy a house to start over. All she had to do was sign her name and walk away. Let the hospital handle Thorne internally. Let him keep his license, perhaps with a slap on the wrist. Let the truth remain buried in confidential files. It was the easy path, the safe path, but Alara remembered the flatline tone. She remembered the family of John Doe left in the dark, believing their loved one had died of a heart attack. She remembered the nurses who had been silenced, the residents who had been intimidated. If she signed, nothing would change. Thorne would remain in power, emboldened by his survival. The culture of fear would persist, and another patient might die. Alara looked up at Julian. No, she said simply. Julian raised an eyebrow. No, I will. I'll not sign a non-disclosure agreement, Alara said. I want the truth to be public. I want Dr. Thorne to be held accountable by the medical board, not just by your HR department. I want his license reviewed. I want the protocols changed. And I want an apology to the staff who were forced to work under his negligence. Julian's face hardened. That is not negotiable, Ms. Vance. If you refuse, we will fight you in court. We will drag your name through the mud. We will question your sanity, your credentials, your motives. Alara smiled, a cold, thin smile. Go ahead, I have Colonel Rostova here, I have the state medical board, and I have the truth. How does that look in court, Mr. Thorne? Julian stared at her, realizing he had underestimated her. He had seen a nurse, he had not seen a warrior. He looked at Rostova, who gave a slight, confirming nod. The leverage had shifted, completely. Julian sighed, rubbing his temples. What do you want? Alara leaned forward. I want a public inquiry. I want Dr. Thorne suspended immediately, pending a full review by the state medical board. And I want to testify, openly. The decision sent shockwaves through the hospital. Within hours, the news was out. Dr. Marcus Thorne had been suspended. An external investigation was launched. The story hit the local news that evening. Meridian General under scrutiny after nurse exposes fatal error, the headline read. The article detailed the death of John Doe, the ignored warnings, and the recent failed simulation. It quoted Alara Vance, describing her background as a decorated field medic and her commitment to patient safety. The public reaction was swift and furious. Patients demanded answers. Staff members came forward with their own stories of Thorne's abuse and negligence. The dam had broken, and Alara was at the center of the flood. For the next week, Alara lived in a whirlwind of interviews, depositions, and meetings. She was exhausted, but she felt alive. For the first time in years, she was using her voice for something greater than herself. She was not just saving one patient, she was saving the system. Colonel Rostova stayed by her side, offering guidance and protection. You're doing good work, Vance, Rostova said one evening as they sat in a quiet cafe. But be prepared. Thorne won't go down without a fight. He's desperate. Alara nodded. I know, but I'm not afraid anymore. Rostova smiled. Good, because the hardest part is yet to come. The hearing before the state medical board was held in a large, formal chamber in the state capitol. The room was filled with reporters, hospital administrators, and medical professionals. Marcus Thorne sat at the defendant's table, looking haggard and defeated. His lawyer, a high-priced attorney from a prestigious firm, argued that Thorne had acted in good faith, that the situation was complex, that Alara Vance was a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. They tried to paint her as unstable, citing her vague resume and her sudden departure from humanitarian work. But Alara was prepared. She presented her credentials verified by the military. She presented the testimonies of her former commanders, including General Holloway, who spoke via video link from retirement. "Alara Vance is the most competent medic I have ever served with," Holloway stated. "Her instincts are flawless. If she said it was cyanide, it was cyanide." To ignore her was not just a mistake, it was malpractice. The board members listened intently. They reviewed the evidence, the toxicology reports, the simulation recordings, the nursing notes. The case against Thorne was overwhelming, but the final blow came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lee, the resident who had tried to intervene during the simulation, testified. "Dr. Thorne created an environment of fear," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "We were afraid to question him, afraid to speak up. When Nurse Vance tried to warn him, he silenced her, and because of that, a patient died. And in the simulation, another patient died. It's not just about one mistake, it's about a pattern, a culture that values ego over safety." The room was silent. Marcus Thorne put his head in his hands. He knew it was over. Please share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of courage and integrity. Your shares help spread these important messages to a wider audience. And don't forget to subscribe for more compelling narratives. The verdict was delivered 3 days later. Dr. Marcus Thorne's medical license was revoked. He was barred from practicing medicine in the state of Washington. The hospital settled the wrongful death lawsuit with John Doe's family for a substantial sum and issued a public apology. Julian Thorne resigned as chief of staff, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew it was to save the hospital from further reputational damage. Meridian General announced a comprehensive review of its emergency protocols, including mandatory training, on hierarchical communication and patient safety. And Alara Vance, she was offered her job back with a promotion. She was asked to lead a new task force on crisis management and staff training, but Alara declined. She had learned that she could not change the system from within, not yet, not while the wounds were still fresh. Instead, she accepted a position with the State Medical Board as a special consultant, working to improve safety standards across all hospitals in the region. It was a role that suited her. It allowed her to use her expertise on a broader scale to prevent tragedies before they happened. 6 months later, Alara stood on the steps of Meridian General. The rain had stopped and the sun was shining, casting a warm glow on the glass facade. She was not wearing scrubs. She was wearing a suit similar to the one she had worn during the drill. She was there to deliver a lecture to the new staff, a mandatory session on the importance of listening. As she walked into the lobby, she saw familiar faces. Nurses who smiled at her, not with fear, but with respect. Residents who nodded in acknowledgement. The culture had changed. It was slower, harder, but it was changing. She walked into the conference room where 100 young doctors and nurses waited. She looked out at them, seeing the potential, the hope, the fear. She began to speak. "Medicine is not just about science," she said. "It is about humility. It is about knowing that you do not know everything. It is about listening to the person standing next to you because they might see what you miss. I learned this the hard way, and I hope you learn it the easy way." She spoke for an hour, sharing stories from the field, from the ER, from the hearing. She spoke about John Doe. She spoke about the cost of arrogance, and when she finished, the applause was not polite. It was heartfelt, genuine. After the lecture, Alara walked out into the courtyard. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh, clean air. She felt a sense of peace she had not felt in years. The ghosts of her past were still there, but they were quieter now. She had faced them. She had defeated them. She had found her voice, and in doing so, she had helped others find theirs. A young nurse approached her shyly. "Ms. Vance," Alara turned. "Yes, I just wanted to say thank you," the nurse said, "for speaking up." "For not giving up," Alara smiled. "Thank you for listening," she said. The nurse nodded and walked away. Alara watched her go, then turned and walked toward the exit. She had work to do. There were other hospitals, other systems, other injustices to address. But for now, she was content. She had won not just the battle, but the war, and she had done it with integrity. If this story inspired you, please leave a comment below telling us what moral theme resonated most with you. Was it the importance of humility? The power of speaking up? We love hearing from our community. The story of Alara Vance is a reminder that competence is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is ignored. But it is always there waiting for the moment to shine, and when it does, it can change everything. It can save lives. It can restore justice. It can heal wounds. Alara did not seek glory. She did not seek power. She sought truth. And in finding it, she found herself. As she drove away from the hospital, the city of Seattle sprawling before her, she felt a sense of purpose. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer running. She was Alara Vance, and she was ready for whatever came next. In the end, the title of this story was not just a description of events. It was a promise. Her warning was ignored until disaster struck. The disaster was not just the death of a patient. It was the collapse of a corrupt system, and the warning was not just a medical diagnosis. It was a call for change, a call for humility, a call for justice. And thanks to Alara's courage, that call was heard. The aftermath was not perfect. There were still challenges, still obstacles. But the direction had changed, the tide had turned, and that made all the difference. As we conclude this narrative, we invite you to reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever been in a situation where your voice was ignored? What did you do? How did it feel? Share your stories in the comments. Let's build a community of support and empowerment. And remember, your voice matters. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Thank you for joining us on this journey with Alara Vance. We hope her story has inspired you to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult, even when it is scary. Because in the end, integrity is its own reward, and justice, though delayed, is never denied. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting our channel by becoming a member. Members get access to exclusive content, behind-the-scenes insights, and early access to new stories. Your support helps us continue to create high-quality, meaningful content.